Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and today we're going to talk about creating an eco-friendly garden which will also save you time and money. Gardening has changed a lot over the last 10 to 20 years, and many of the jobs that we all thought were absolutely necessary have now been discovered to be either not necessary or actually in a few cases actually something you shouldn't do. So even if you're not really interested in being eco-friendly, I think it's always really helpful to look at different ways of gardening so that you can work out which one will fit best into your lifestyle. I've been talking to Sally Nex, author of How to Garden in the Low Carbon Way, and it's a really practical book about all the eco-friendly things you can do right from designing your garden to maintaining it, and I'll put links to that in the description below. Sally's giving me her 3 top easy wins for creating an eco garden, and I'm also going to include some bonus tips at the end about eco-friendly design. When I read How to Garden the Low Carbon Way, I realised that many of the things that I was already doing were things that I'd started doing not because I particularly wanted to be eco-friendly, but because they were easier or they saved me money. So one of the main advantages of being eco-friendly in your garden is you're not just using fewer of the Earth's resources, you're using fewer of your own resources, your own time, your own effort, your own money. I'll put links to the book in the description below and to any other resources that I mention. And also a timestamp, so if you want to jump to a particular tip, then you can do that. The Middlesized Garden uploads weekly with gardening tips, ideas and inspiration, and if you'd like to see the videos when you open up YouTube, then click the subscribe button. They're absolutely free. And if you'd like YouTube to tell you when a new video is uploaded, then click the notifications bell. Sally's main point is that perhaps we should be more hands-off about our gardening. Recently, Monty Don revised his book, The Complete Gardener, his main gardening how-to book, because he felt that although he'd always been an organic gardener, he'd nevertheless been a bit too tidy.
Well, the lovely thing about environmentally friendly gardening is that it's relatively hands-off. We almost have to wean ourselves off kind of doing all the fiddling and the primping and the preening and the tidying up and all that kind of thing, because again, it's something I think we've been conditioned to do over many, many years, decades, probably hundreds of years actually, if you go back to Victorian times. We've got to be tidy in the garden and it's got to look just so. And actually, most of kind of carbon-friendly garden is to do with leaving things in place and letting things mulch back into the ground and leaving the carbon that you remove, i.e., prunings and that kind of thing, leaving them in the garden, not taking them out to the tip or wherever. So, I mean, there are a few things that I think that it's really quite easy to do and still have a really quite good-looking garden. The first one is to put away the lawnmower, if you can bear to. Certainly to minimise the amount of mowing that you do. The kind of really basic stuff is just to switch away from your petrol mower and use a battery-powered mower instead, or an electric mower, even better. But if you can stick to just mowing perhaps a little patch where you sit, for example, or have picnics or that kind of thing, you can mow that as little as every fortnight, something like that. The less you mow, basically, the more flowers come through, and that means more nectar. It means more actual physical bulk, if you know what I mean, like the actual kind of green matter in your garden is greater, and so it's absorbing more carbon, it's holding more carbon into the soil. What I do in my garden is I have a little patch which I mow every kind of couple of weeks. Then I have a couple of slightly wilder patches that I mow every 4 weeks, every month, and those tend to have lots and lots of things like dandelions and buttercups. And that's the other thing, is like everybody thinks of those as weeds. And they're so pretty, they're so lovely. It's like those areas of the garden are just spangled in yellow and sort of this, the lovely kind of greyish colours that you get from white clover, and I've got a bit of red clover in there as well, I think. And there's lots and lots of little flowers coming up. It doesn't need to get head high or anything like that, just mow it once a month and it stays at a reasonable kind of level. And then if you have a large enough garden, and I do understand this may not be possible for everybody, but if you have a large enough garden, just find yourself a corner at the back and just let it grow, and only mow it about once a year. You actually usually have to, well, you can strim it or you can scythe it, is even better. But if you are able to do that, then what you'll find is that although you won't get quite such numerous flowers, you will get a much higher biodiversity. So that's when all the wildflowers start to come in. I've done that with a little patch at the top of my garden, and I've actually now got pyramid orchids up there. So it's just amazing what you can see that just springs up out of your garden without you having to do anything at all. Quite the opposite, you're doing less because you're putting your mower away.
Sally's advice to mow less often is one I also heard from Jane Moore, author of Planting for Butterflies, who I interviewed last year, and that video is in the description below. Jane suggested that we do a nectar lawn, which means that instead of mowing your lawn weekly, you mow it, say, fortnightly and on a slightly higher setting, so the very little flowers, like clover, exist underneath the lawnmower's blades. And this is wonderful for butterflies and also for other pollinators. So we tried it, and I suggested this to the person in my family who does the mowing, and he embraced it enthusiastically, and I'm sure that he was thinking of biodiversity rather than simply having a few more afternoons in which to relax. And sometimes the lawn looked really pretty. The clover was lovely, and it was lovely to see daisies in the lawn and things. Sometimes, I must be honest, it did look a little bit of a mess. When I interviewed Frances Moskowitz for the video How to Make a Flower Border Look Amazing, and that's in the description below too, she said that one of the reasons why the border looks so good is that she had a really neat tailored lawn and with very sharp edges, and there's no doubt that that really does set a garden off beautifully. But perhaps that's not the only factor. That's why I say this is really very much about what works for you, because if you've got a really busy lifestyle, then a nectar lawn can be a great thing for you. And of course, you can also look at lawn substitutes that don't need mowing, things like chamomile lawns and grass-free lawns, like this one in front of the bench at the Abbey Physic Garden in Faversham. The Abbey Physic Garden is a community garden which is run along completely environmentally friendly and wildlife friendly lines, and it's open to the public. So I'll put a link to it and also to some videos that I've taken there in the description below.
The other thing that you can do that's doing less is to stop digging. Lots of people, particularly who grow vegetables and fruit and that kind of thing, like me, they will be, digging over their gardens, and you go through your garden, don't you? And you get your fork out, and you dig out all your deep-rooted weeds, and you turn it all over. Actually, the less that you can dig, the better, because every time that you dig, you're turning over the soil and you're exposing it to the air. And of course, the soil is the greatest store of carbon that you have in your garden. 86% of the carbon in your garden is held not in the plants and the trees, however many trees you've got, it's held in the soil. And so as soon as you turn that over, that carbon becomes exposed to the air and it oxidizes into carbon dioxide, which, as we all know, is a greenhouse gas. So in fact, the less you turn your soil, the more you lock that carbon into the ground and don't disturb it. And also there's a sort of really good side benefit, which is that you leave the soil's ecosystem completely undisturbed. And that means that, first of all, you get much more sort of biomass underneath the soil as well. And it means that all these really amazing little micro kind of relationships between your plants and the soil. I mean, we know about mycorrhizal fungi, which links plant roots to nutrients in the soil and makes it easier for them to absorb it. There is so much that we don't know about that happens under the soil, and that can only really happen if we leave it alone, if we leave it undisturbed, and that means that your plants will grow better too.
And that certainly saves you a lot of time and effort. I accidentally became a no-dig gardener when we moved here 18 years ago. I'd recently had an operation on my back, so I just didn't want to dig. And when I saw gardening jobs to do saying dig over the soil and prepare it for, I thought, oh, well, perhaps I don't have to do that, or maybe I'll think about that another time. And the time went on, and it turned out it just wasn't necessary. And now more and more people are turning to no-dig or no-till, and the guru of this is Charles Dowding, and I did a video with him called No-Dig for Flower Borders, which you can see in the description below. But the essential points of it are that you only dig in your garden to plant a plant or to dig one up, and that you keep your soil covered as much as possible either by plants or with a mulch. Both deprive annual weed seeds of light, so not only do you get less digging, but you should have less weeding. In fact, the United States Department of Agriculture has actually recommended that you should see as little of your soil as possible, either by planting on it or by mulching. We may feel that what we do in our little gardens isn't going to make much difference, but about 30% of the land in urban cities and towns in Britain is urban gardens. And we in Britain are very short of land, so there may be more in towns and cities around the world. Collectively, in urban gardens, we can make a huge difference. And if you look at a map of your town or city, like this one, you'll see that really there's a lot of green space that isn't devoted to either buildings or agriculture, which can be made more environmentally friendly, more wildlife friendly and prettier for us to enjoy. Tip 3 is to try to keep as much of your garden waste as possible in your garden.
As soon as you load it all in the car and take it down the tip, I mean, it's a good thing to do. I wouldn't remotely not recycling your green waste. It's actually, fantastic. But of course, taking it down to the tip, you're adding a car journey to your carbon emissions. You're adding the transport of that green waste to a recycling depot where it will be rotted down into a municipal green waste. Then it's shipped back to you, more carbon as you've got heavy loads on lorries and that kind of thing. That's fine as far as it goes, but it's much better if you can, just to keep all of that as far as possible in your own garden. So composting is the bit that we all like to try and do. So, for example, if you've got woody plant prunings, that kind of thing, it's amazing how much you can get into the compost, particularly if you've got shredder, actually. Shredders are your friend, because then you can actually turn even quite woody prunings into stuff that's very compostable. And even if you've got sort of larger things like, if you're cutting a large branch off a tree, something like that, cut those into shorter lengths. And you can either make a log pile out of them, which is the easy way to do it. You can turn it into a vegetable bed if you're into your hugelkultur. If you look up that particular technique, it's a wonderful technique whereby you basically make a kind of a compost heap, really, where you start with your logs, with your bigger logs, then you cover that with more compost over the top, composting material, I should say, unrotted over the top. Then you add topsoil and what rotted compost over the top of that. So you've got a great big mound, and then you plant into the top. And what you've got is a really lovely free draining mound that's got lots of goodness underneath that's feeding your plants and, of course, rotting down into the ground. And after you've used it for a year or two, it literally, the mound collapses and it just ends up as being stuff that you can then recycle into the garden. I've also, at the end of my garden, got, it's a sort of a fedge. Fedges are really wonderful things. They're basically a cross between a fence and a hedge. You can stack all of your woody prunings. You can stack pretty much anything in there, actually, but it's most useful for, branches and thick things that you can't put through the shredder. And if you make a double row of staggered posts, and then you fill that double row with the logs or whatever it is that you've got just lay them on the ground, and you just keep feeding it. And you put the larger bits to the outside just to hold everything in, really, as much as anything else. And then you just keep feeding it and feeding it and feeding it. Add more and more and more. And what you find is that the bottom layer very gradually, over years we're talking about, very gradually rots down and rots down. It's a wonderful habitat for wildlife, really encourages lots of soil activity and that kind of thing. And it's somewhere handy to put your waste. It's a really good way of getting rid of all that waste without having to go to the tip. It's fantastic.
One thing I've found very useful is that once you've put your garden waste through a shredder, you can actually sometimes just pour it over the border and treat it as a mulch immediately. You don't even have to compost it down. It'll cover up annual weed seeds and deprive them of light, and it'll slowly mulch down to return nutrients to the soil. Last summer, I started using lawn clippings on potatoes. So instead of earthing up potatoes, I just piled up lawn clippings around them. And it was a fantastic weed screen. I didn't have to earth up my potatoes and I didn't have to weed. So that was time saving. So what about garden design tips that are eco-friendly? Sally's main point is that reusing something you've got or recycling something else is always going to be more eco-friendly and, of course, usually cheaper than buying new. The gardens that I've visited in other videos, and I'll put them all in the description below, have done some really good ideas on this. This is a greenhouse in Australia which has been built by the owner of the house completely from recycled doors and windows and shower doors. Some of them were things that he took out of his own house when he was renovating it, and others are from other sort of builders' excess stuff that's been taken out of other houses. But literally nothing in this greenhouse is new. And meanwhile, garden designer Posy Gentle's shed has got recycled doors and windows and some of the other elements as well, so it's a partly recycled shed. Paths and terraces are quite expensive for you to make, and they're also quite expensive in terms of the earth's resources because materials have to be quarried or manufactured and then they're transported and they're heavy. So probably one of the best things to do is to see if you can adapt what you've already got or reuse it in some way so that you're not buying new. Here in this north-facing garden, they weren't too keen on the pavers that they had already when they moved into the house, so they painted them, and they repaint them every couple of years, and at the moment they're not even using an outdoor paint. So that's a very simple, cheap tip. In garden designer Jane Beedle's garden, she had some pavers she really didn't like, and so they got them up and they broke them up, and it costs quite a lot to get things like pavers taken away and disposed of, so she saved money by putting them inside cages or gabions. And these used to be used to prop up sort of falling landscapes or as sea defences, but they're now used quite a lot in garden design. And this path in a Whitstable garden was just an ugly concrete path, and the owners thought, should we take it up? But actually, in the end, what they decided to do was to make the cracks in it a bit wider and then to fill it in with a mosaic of old tiles and bricks, and it looks great. The other thing you can do is simply to have less paving. For example, having stepping stones in the lawn instead of a path, and once again, that will save you money. So do put your eco-friendly tips in the comments below. And there's a sustainable garden playlist at the end of this video, and if you'd like more tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden, then do subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.